was shopping in London, asking shopkeepers, tell me about your energy bill. Every one of them said their energy bills had doubled in the last 4 years. One bartender I talked to, a young woman, she was in her 20s. She said she lives with her folks and they don't shower at home anymore because it costs them so much to heat the water. They go and shower at the gym. So this is the kind of impact that is affecting regular working class people that, I will put it this way, these elites have these ideas around climate and energy policy and we should use less and everything else. Well, it's killing their industry and it's hammering the poor and the working class.
Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast, where we bring you interviews with industry leaders, climate champions, sustainability practitioners, EHS and hazmat professionals making an impact in their businesses today. Each leader solving complex challenges and delivering solutions within their areas of expertise. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and thanks for joining us today. Before we jump in, make sure to follow us on your devices and visit my website at www.seankgrady.com and sign up for our newsletter and email announcements. Now let's get started.
Welcome to the Environmental Transformation Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Grady, and today's guest is Robert Bryce. He is an author, journalist, and a film producer. He has been writing about energy, power, and politics for 4 decades. He recently authored 6 books, and he's including this most recent book is A Question of Power, Electricity, and the Wealth of Nations. He's been invited to speak at numerous keynote speaker engagements all over the world, and he's also the co-producer of 2 documentaries, including a 5-part documentary series, The Justice, Power, Politics, and the Grid. You can follow Robert on his Substack. It's at robertbryce.substack.com and see his all his information there. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I've been kind of following you on LinkedIn, watching some of your posts, and also reading some of your Substack stuff. And I thought, wow, this would be a good opportunity to bring you on the show and talk a little bit about energy, what's going on in the world around energy, and where you see the direction of this going, especially in our new administration. But maybe if you could just talk a little bit about yourself and how you got started really being so passionate about following this topic in your life.
Sure. I'm a newspaper guy. I was the editor of my high school newspaper now, gosh, a long time ago, almost 40 years ago.
Okay.
I've always been interested in newspapers. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma that was back when my folks always took the newspaper, and there was a morning paper and an afternoon paper in Tulsa at that time, the Tulsa Tribune. So I've always followed the news business. And I think in terms of why I started writing about energy and power, I think it kind of picked me. I don't know. A colleague I knew at the Austin Chronicle years ago said, you don't pick what you write, it picks you. And I think there's some truth to that. But the long story short is I've been incredibly fortunate to do what I do. This is what I do. It's my purpose and my passion. I care about these issues deeply, and consider myself incredibly lucky to do what I do.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm a fellow Oklahoman myself, born in Oklahoma City. Got a lot of family out there in El Reno and Yukon and area. So that's kind of where we're all from,
Sure.
So great. I've been like I said, we've been watching some of your posts and the energy boom that's kind of, I think, getting ready to take off again. I mean, we go through these ups and downs in the energy markets like crazy, whether it's, oil and gas and, the electricity that we're producing. But, I guess one big question I think a lot of our listeners would be interested to know is your position on, can climate change reductions coexist with energy growth? And if so, how does that work?
Well, that's an interesting question. I guess my first response is, what's my attitude on climate change and policy? It's climate change is an issue. It's not our only issue.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're seeing now, especially in the last 3 years, especially since the Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is I think a much needed course correction away from climatism to more energy realism, and that we can talk about climate issues and I'm not opposed to talking about it, but we have to be very clear about what we're facing and what are the other issues that we face as a society that we have to deal with, and what do we have to be prepared for. So such as, say, pandemics, clean water, clean, sewerage, schools, hospitals. We have a limited amount of money and a limited amount of focus as people, as society, and our politics. We have to balance whatever action we take on CO2 emissions reductions with every other issue in the world. Yeah. Whether every other issue we handle. So as far as, in energy growth and CO2 emissions, well, it depends. If you're in China and India, there is no doubt that their CO2 emissions are rising and rising rapidly. Why? Because they're using so much coal. And I'm working on a piece on that right now. Whereas in the US and in the West in general, our energy intensity of our economies are falling, or rather slowly, but still. So the CO2 intensity of our economies is not as great as it used to be. So, the short answer to your question is, can CO2 emissions fall as well and at the same time that economies can grow? Well, it depends.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, it probably needs to have a little bit of a combination of maybe some renewable energies added to the mix, right? And I think utilities are interested in that. But it also seems like there's also a reluctance or maybe a hesitation at times because of the reliability of some of the renewable energy sources that are out there. What's your take on renewable energy and how that can be an effective, offset or an addition to kind of the demand nature of a lot of the utilities with energy?
Well, let me answer the question in this way. If we're serious about large scale CO2 emissions reductions, we have to get serious about nuclear. There are very serious limits on alternative energy. I don't call them renewables. I don't call it clean energy. It's alternative energy. Wind and solar. I'm a longtime critic. I have solar panels on the roof of my house. I have 8.5 kilowatts of solar on my house here in Austin, Texas. Why? Because I got 3 different subsidies for doing it. I'm a longtime critic of the wind business, proudly so. I've seen how the wind energy sector has acted across rural America, and I think in many cases their behavior has been reprehensible. And I will say that on every street corner in this country. I've seen how they act and the way that they hide the truth about what they're doing. And I'm also a lifelong bird watcher. So I care about birds and bats. And there's just no doubt that the wind industry is taking a deadly toll on avian wildlife. So is alternative energy a good thing? Well, it depends. Again, where is it? And I'm a longtime critic of offshore wind energy. The only thing dumber than onshore wind energy is offshore wind energy. So, does alternative energy have a role in the mix? Yes. But what we're seeing now very clearly is solar is growing much faster than wind. And the numbers show this very clearly. Why? Well, it has 10 times the power density, and that's key. So yes, alt energy is going to grow, especially solar and batteries and all the projections. And we saw this in 2024 here in the US. We're going to see a repeat of that again in 2025. Large expansions of solar and batteries, less so with wind, almost no expansion in nuclear, and some expansion in natural gas.
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing that in our industry too. I think many of our listeners know I'm in the environmental consulting business and power energy, and yeah, we're seeing a decline in the wind, renewables, I guess, or alternative sources. So
and one of the key reasons, sorry to interrupt, is the fierce backlash across rural America.
Yeah,
against the wind business, and I've documented it myself. The Renewable Rejection Database. I think the latest tally is 471 rejections or restrictions of wind energy since 2015. The count on solar is growing. It's now at about 310. I've also created the Global Renewable Rejection Database. These issues, these land use conflicts are happening all over the world. You saw 6 rejections of solar in the UK in January and February alone. So it's not just the US.
Well, with the increased demand of data centers required to lead this AI boom we have, what challenges do you see lying ahead for the public utilities and their ability to respond to this energy demand?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Sean, because it's clear that, the alt energy is not going to be able to meet this demand for the 5 nines of reliability that the data center guys demand.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be natural gas. And you've seen just in the last few days, Energy Transfer announced a big gas deal for AI data centers. Williams companies based in Tulsa, they just announced a day or so ago another big deal. I think $1.6 billion gas purchase deal for data centers. The details on that were kind of scant. But Rystad, in fact, I'm going to Florida. I'm giving a speech later this week. They just released a study that showed that yes, we're going to see a big increase in demand. That's obvious at this point, but that demand is going to be fairly geographically constrained. I'm just looking for the slide that I made here on this, because to me it was really quite interesting that that the demand is going to be concentrated largely. More than half of the demand will be in 4 states: Virginia, Texas, Arizona, and Georgia. With Virginia being one of the main focal points, apparently by 2035. But of course, Data Center Alley near Dulles Airport is one of the key areas in Virginia. But it's interesting to me to see how the concentration of the power demand in AI and data centers is really focusing in on those few states, those 4 states, and they're all in the South.
We are seeing a lot of data centers going in the Midwest. You got the quantum program up in Chicago. It's going on. I mean, there's still a lot of, I think, activity outside of those states. So, which is, I mean, encouraging for, I guess, just distributing the quantum and the AI boom across the Midwest and the U.S. But the demand that we're hearing from the utilities they're really struggling, and they don't actually seem to have enough in engineering consulting firms to help them design and build and prepare for the growth that needs to happen in the industry right now. We're seeing an uptick in that, along with a lot of other consultants and engineering firms that are working in this space. It's a really fascinating time to see the demand. And I've heard that some of these AI companies are willing to sign up with like 30-year guaranteed pricing structures for the energy that they want, that they're going to demand, right? With these utilities to basically fund the infrastructure needed to build out the utility infrastructure. I think that's amazing.
Yeah, I think there are several facets to this, and I've written about this a fair amount, and know a number of people in the engineering, procurement, and construction business, EPC companies. Mm-hmm. And I was talking to a friend of mine just a couple of weeks ago. He said, he's speaking here, I've had clients come to me and sign no bid contracts because they know that, and this is a big outfit, that we have the manpower to do it. And they're just saying, we need it built. We're not going to haggle with you over the price. Get on it. Mm-hmm. But the key constraint that the EPC companies are having is manpower. Mm-hmm. So, there are a number of factors that are coming together here when it comes to this, talking about expanding the grid. And first, let me just be clear. It's easy to talk about massive expansions. Oh, we need 10 or 12 or 15% more, production. That's very hard to do when you have a system that's as big as the United States electric grid, 1.3 terawatts of capacity. But you need the skilled labor. And I've heard this over and over. We don't have enough welders. We don't have enough electricians, pipe fitters, steam fitters, just regular laborers to get the jobs done. And we're having to pay higher wages to less skilled workers, because if we don't, they'll go away. So that's an inflationary aspect in the overall ecosystem around the grid. The other is the supply chains, and talking to some of the key suppliers, they're looking at, for high power transformers, you're talking wait times of 4 years. For switchgear, breakers, other kind of equipment, similar kinds of wait times. So you have a number of factors that are coming together here around these ideas around the expansion of the grid. Some of the players have the gas turbines. Another thing, the F-class turbines, they're looking at wait times 3 to 4 years. Now, some of the suppliers, some of the vendors, they have all the stuff they need and they can go and get it done right away, but many of them don't. So a lot of factors at work. Besides, I mean, it's interesting you say that about the design people, the consulting firms, engineering firms. Yeah, that's part of it. But last summer in Virginia Beach, one of the utility guys said, we don't need any more engineers. We're full up with engineers. We need welder
and we need the parts. We need the raw materials, right? That's another, component of it, obviously. Yeah. So
there's one guy in the EPC business put it to me. He said, if we have the parts, we don't have the people. And if we have the people, we don't have the parts.
Wow. Yeah, it's a circular issue, right? I mean, it's like, wow, what's the problem?
Hello, ET Nation. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. If you enjoy the interviews we bring you, please consider supporting the program by visiting my website at SeanKGrady.com and buy me a cup of coffee. proceeds will go towards helping me continue producing timely content and offsetting production costs. I'd also like to take a moment and recognize a few of our sponsors of the show who have been amazing partners and who are ET Nation legends. If you're looking for a driller and an environmental contracting firm to help you delineate the extent of contamination at your site, then look no further than Cascade Environmental. Cascade has over 37 offices across the country and offers a huge range of environmental and geotechnical drilling, site characterization, and remediation services. With their huge fleet of equipment and nationwide coverage, Cascade is a great choice to support your environmental and infrastructure needs. To learn more about their company, visit their website at cascade-env.com. That's cascade-env.com. I'd also like to give a shout out to Enthalpy Analytical. If you're looking for a single source for all your laboratory testing services, then give Enthalpy Analytical a call. With their network of accredited laboratories, experienced project managers, chemists, and industry professionals, they have everything you need to support your next project. They can analyze anything from drinking water, groundwater, soil, sediment, sludge, air, and much more. To learn more about Enthalpy Analytical, visit their website at enthalpy.com. That's enthalpy.com. Finally, I'd like to recognize Zappa Stewart, the leading provider of superabsorbent polymer technology for the power, dredging, oil and gas, and remediation sectors for over 20 years. When a reliable, fast, and cost-effective liquid waste solidification solution is needed, customers count on Zappa Stewart's brand of SAPs and technical expertise. When liquid waste needs to be out of sight and out of mind, give Zappa Stewart a call. To learn more about Zappa Stewart, go to my website at SeanKGrady.com. That's SeanKGrady.com. Now, let's dive back into this interview.
Yeah, this demand and this growth need for the industry, and I mean, really in society and within the U.S. and I mean, really outside probably too. But it's starting to become a very interesting time right now to see the utilities. I always thought that, solar was a kind of a magic bullet into trying to, take on and recreate or generate some additional, power. But I thought, boy, if every house had a solar panel on it, we could, we would have such a demand. We'd be able to, manage the power well. Well, the problem is utilities aren't really, they're built for transmission, not, storage, and there would be too much storage coming into the grid, right? So that's not really a great option in when you think about it, because it would cost so much to change the infrastructure.
Well, you're absolutely right. And then you have the class issue here, Sean, that is absolutely key to pay attention to. You've seen in California where the state regulator has looked at this and said, this is a cost shift from the poor to the rich. Renters don't have solar panels on the roofs of their houses.
Right,
you have to own your home.
Right.
And so people who can afford them, and I'm very lucky, I have solar panels on the roof of my house, but it's a very small, maybe it is small, maybe here in Austin, Texas, it's not as big as maybe in California, but that's a cost shift from from me to the Starbucks barista or the janitor at the school or someone who isn't as fortunate as I am. And I take no pleasure in saying that, but it's not me making this point. It is other regulators looking at this and saying, this is, as Ashley Brown from the Harvard Electricity Project put it several years ago, Robin Hood in reverse. So, rooftop solar, it sounds great. Everybody likes the idea of it, but we have to be very sober about what the consequences of this are. And something that's a big issue in Australia now, because the prices are so high, more and more people are putting solar panels on their roofs. So you have, during the midday, you have very little load on the traditional utilities. And then 5, 6 o'clock, boom, suddenly it all comes back. So the system has to change. And as you point out, that's a system cost that has to be dealt with.
No, I agree. And, recently I attended the Indiana Future Energy Summit. It was here in Indiana, hosted by the IBJ, the Indianapolis Business Journal. Great publication. And it was mentioned that the Indiana Governor, Mike Braun, has a freedom and opportunity agenda when it comes to energy. And basically there's two tenets. It's all of the above energy strategy and promoting entrepreneurship and innovation. And
who's against that? There's no apple pie and Chevrolet there, baseball. I mean, who can argue with that? That's great. Yeah. So how does this approach fit into what you're seeing across the U.S. and the direction
coming from maybe the Trump administration, because everyone's right now wondering what the heck and how do I respond to the new direction of the administration and a lot of these policies. And it goes across not just energy. There's all kinds of other like EPA and whatnot. But,
Sure.
What do you think?
Well, how long do we have? I mean, and where to start? Look, this has been the biggest U-turn in American energy policy ever, right? In a span of a few weeks, what we've seen from the end of the Biden administration now to the Trump administration coming in, just a radical overhaul, a radical shift away from what I think is very clearly a lot of political energy, a lot of politically favored energy toward energy realism. I'm a big fan and fortunate to call him a friend of mine, Chris Wright. The fact that he is now the Secretary of Energy, I think is fantastic. He's very much a pragmatist. He's an energy humanist. He's pro-nuclear. He knows the energy business as well or better than anyone I know. He knows all aspects of it. And so I think he's going to do some house cleaning at the DOE, and that is something that is well overdue. I just published a piece on Substack about these last minute loans that were made by Jigger Shah and the Loan Programs Office, made 4 days before Trump was sworn in, to two companies that are inexplicable why they would give a $1.66 billion loan guarantee to Plug Power when Plug just yesterday reported a $2.1 billion loss for 2024. There's a company that's never made any money. They're trying to do green hydrogen, which is a loser of an idea from the get-go. And they gave another $6 billion to Rivian, the EV maker, who last year produced about 51,000 vehicles and lost $91,000 for every EV they sold. They didn't make up for it in volume. So why the hell is the Department of Energy Loan Program Office pushing out these kinds of loans at the very last minute? I just think it's inexcusable. And those loans apparently are under review by the DOE, and they should be canceled.
Well, that's interesting that you highlighted those. I think there was a lot of last minute activities going on to kind of ensure some of their policies won't get axed, which I think there's some stuff like that going on.
Well, and it's also happening now on gas appliances. The Congress, I don't know whether there's the House and the Senate, but they repealed the methane fee that was implemented by the Biden administration. The gas appliance rules that were put in place by the EPA. There were a lot of things that I just frankly see as anti-consumer. And I say this is a nonpartisan. I'm a reporter. I try and be very sober about how I look at these issues. And I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. I'm disgusted. I'm deeply disgusted. I'm no big fan of Trump. I think he's a lunatic in a lot of ways. But I think on some of the energy policies that he's done, especially when it comes to offshore wind, I could kiss the guy.
Well, I mean, I was. It
would be a peck on the cheek. You never mind. I mean, seriously though, I just think the Biden administration was giving away the store on offshore wind. The foreign companies were coming in. They weren't even having to post bonds for removal. And they were putting these wind projects right in the middle of known North Atlantic right whale habitat. It's just outrageous what happened. And so, that is one thing that I am firmly on side with Trump on, is that canceling this offshore wind boondoggle was long overdue. And the Biden administration just effectively just said, yeah, have it here, have whatever you want. It was outrageous.
Well, you were touching on earlier about, energy realism and energy humanism. In a recent speech you gave, you said 47% of the earth live in energy poverty.
Yeah.
And 3.2 million people die each year of household air pollution, according to the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about energy realism, energy humanism, and why it's so important for those in undeveloped countries.
Sure. Well, so just a brief background story. So I gave this presentation in London a few weeks ago, and I was flattered to be invited. It was the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship. And I went through and told the story of about 8 years ago. I was in India and went to this small rural agricultural village called Majlishpur, located about an hour southeast of Kolkata. And I met a woman there named Rahena Jamadar. She'd only had electricity in her home for the last 14 years. She had her first child when she was 16. And one of her daughters was going to the university in Kolkata, and she was very clearly very proud of this. And so here was a woman who'd lived almost, 2/3 of her life in the dark. And we chatted a little bit more through my friend Joya Shree Roy was interpreting. And I said, well, Rehenna, if you'd had a chance to if you'd had lights in your home when you were a child, would you have gone to the university? And she said, yes, I would have gone. And it was one of those moments. Now I didn't kind of understand what it was being said then. And it took me a day or two to kind of absorb it. But I came to I just realized, oh, well, darkness kills human potential and electricity nourishes it. And here was a woman who'd known what the opportunity that had passed her by because she'd been living in the dark.
Mm-hmm.
But she's just one of billions of people around the world who live in energy poverty.
Mm-hmm.
The number you cited, yes, 47% of the world's population live in countries where per capita electricity use is 1,200 kilowatt hours or less. 1,200 kilowatt hours per year or less. 1,200 kilowatt hours is about as much as electricity is used by a big kitchen refrigerator in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
So this energy poverty problem is rampant. And then there, of that 3.7 billion, roughly billion, this is maybe 800 million, have no electricity at all. So if we're serious about eradicating poverty, if you're serious about being a pro-human person, a humanist, then we need more energy for more people all over the world. And it's not just electricity, it's propane. So we can quit using, those women and girls in particular can quit using traditional biomass, charcoal, wood, dung, wheat straw to cook their food. And if you can do that, then you can save a lot of lives. And as the World Health Organization estimates, 3.2 million people die every year from indoor air pollution. It's a scandal what's happening.
Oh, wow. Well, I mean, I think that we all realize that we need energy. We need to, because we're all so used to it. We're dependent upon it now. I mean, like if you cut it off, I don't know what we'd be able to do. I mean, we'd probably go crazy as a civilization these days, right?
Well, exactly. And this is something that we take for granted, this availability of cheap, abundant, reliable energy and power. And we're incredibly lucky to have what we have. And, if we can zoom out for just a minute. Now, I mentioned, I'm no fan of Trump, but what he has done is brought energy realism to the fore, and he's done it in a very powerful way. And you compare that to what is happening in Europe. I was just in London for 10 days. The Brits are killing their economy purposely, and they're enjoying it, I guess. I don't know. The same with Germany, the same with Australia. They're embracing these net zero policies that are going to have no effect on global climate, but it's because they feel this need to, I don't know, be part of the club, whatever it is, but they're constraining their ability to produce energy and power. It's driving up costs and killing their industry. Mm-hmm. When I was in Britain, well, it was last September, the last blast furnace in Britain was shut down. The Port Talbot Steelworks in Wales. Mm-hmm. The Brits, one of the homes of the cradles of the Industrial Revolution, they can no longer create virgin steel because the energy policies there are so bad. I mean, what are you doing? I mean, truly, what are you doing? I interviewed a bunch of people, just on the street, right? I was, shopping in London, asking shopkeepers, well, tell me about your energy bill. Every one of them said their energy bills had doubled in the last 4 years. One bartender I talked to, a young woman, she was in her 20s. She said she lives with her folks and they don't shower at home anymore because it costs them so much to heat the water. They go and shower at the gym. So this is the kind of impact that is affecting regular working class people that, I will put it this way, these elites have these ideas around climate and energy policy and we should use less and everything else. Well, it's killing their industry and it's hammering the poor and the working class.
Well, for the past 4 years, climate activism led by these NGOs and government officials have been front and center when it comes to promoting climate change initiatives and reducing greenhouse gases. So, there are a few talking about, continued need for fossil fuels to drive our existing future energy demand. I mean, few are talking about it, but why are only a few talking about it when it needs to be like, we need to continue using fossil fuels. We cannot stop doing that. It's too much of a reliance on it. There's not enough renewables or other sources to, make up the difference.
You're absolutely right. I mean, this is just, this is obvious. And yet there isn't a very entrenched, highly funded or very well-funded group of NGOs that are promoting this climatism at any cost. And it's a date with disaster. And what happened in the Biden administration, and again, this is just not a political statement, this is just fact, that these NGOs, including Rocky Mountain Institute, which led some of the bans on natural gas, including Rewiring America, which also had this electrify everything push that was got a lot of traction in the Biden administration. They were given massive amounts of money and government contracts under the Biden administration. So as Elon Musk said the other day on Joe Rogan, well, they call themselves non-governmental organizations, but if they're getting money from the government, they're part of the government. So we have to be realistic. We have to be very sober about our energy and climate issues. And can we make a contribution? Yes. And the United States has. The U.S. has reduced its CO2 emissions more on a absolute basis than any other country in the world, 1.1 gigatons since 2000. But what has happened over that same time? China and India have increased their CO2 emissions by 10 gigatons. So again, the story is not about the United States, not about Germany or the UK or Japan or France. It's about what's happening in China and India. And what are they doing? They're burning
everything.
They're burning. I don't want to get a shit ton of coal. Is that can I use that?
They're burning a lot of coal, right?
Yes.
Right. We have so many good, I would say, pretty good environmental regulations that are in place to help companies and to help us as normal citizens have clean air and water and things like that. I don't know that we can do anymore or should be doing anymore. We got all these other countries that are not doing their part, right, which is causing the biggest problem. And so how can we be held responsible for changing climate change globally when we really don't have control of the biggest contributors in the big grand scheme of things?
Well, and that's right. And it's China and India. I haven't published these numbers yet. I've been working on these slides for the last couple of weeks, and I had a piece that I wrote about the Plug Power results yesterday or today, rather than write about the coal market. But the amount of capacity, coal-fired capacity that's now under construction in China is 204,000 megawatts, 204 gigawatts. That's larger. That amount of capacity is greater than all of the coal fleet in the United States, larger than the entire coal fleet in the U.S. I mean, these are just massive numbers.
And they're getting further.
China's building more nuclear. I'm pro-nuclear. They're building about 30 gigawatts of nuclear capacity. They're building 204 gigawatts of coal. So again, we have to be very sober about where we are and what is the big story. What is the real story about what's happening? Because we're not going to solve this climate issue as the United States or as Western Europe. It just isn't going to happen. And yet we're just inundated with this climatism and people who call themselves climate warriors, climate hawks, climate activists. Well, give yourself a medal if you like it, if it makes you happy, but let's get real about what's going on.
Right. I mean, I think, we all want, like I said, clean air, clean water and stuff, and you want to reduce and the emissions as much as possible. It makes sense, but we got to make this, we got to balance it in a way. What do you see as the biggest growth area in the energy sector over the next 5 to 10 years to meet the energy demand in this country? Is it distribution and infrastructure growth? Is it building nuclear power plants? Is it adding more renewables? I mean, it sounds like maybe a combination of all this, but what's your take on this?
Well, let's talk about nuclear a little bit because I mentioned it in regards to China. So last year, the U.S. added one new nuclear reactor that was Vogtle 4, and that's 1.1 gigawatts, 1,100 megawatts. That is the last of the nuclear plants that are now under construction in the U.S. The U.S., which has led the world in nuclear capacity for decades, now has no nuclear reactors being built, not a one, not permitted and being built. They're moving ground, they're moving dirt in some locations, but in those locations, those companies don't have permits for their reactors, their reactor designs. Now they may get them. But again, I'm pro-nuclear. I've been saying the same things for 15 years. Natural gas to nuclear, end to end, is the way forward if we're going to be serious about decarbonization. But there are 42 different companies that are now trying to get into the SMR business, 42. And so that includes some names you probably heard: Oklo, NuScale, Nano Nuclear, Allo, Terrestrial Energy, TerraPower. I mean, there are just a ton of companies that are trying to get into that market. Which ones will succeed and what size is their reactor going to be? What chemistry are they going to use? Those are all open questions, and I don't know the answers to them. or I don't know the answer. The time will tell. The market will tell. So while we wait for that market to mature, and it will take probably a decade for it to mature and get significant amounts of new capacity online, what's the story going to be? Nearly all of the data center capacity, AI capacity, et cetera, is going to be met with natural gas. That's clear because there's no other option.
No other source.
We're also going to build. There's also a lot of money still through the IRA. Now we'll see whether it's Trump and the Republicans can repeal the IRA, but it's going to be a ton of solar and batteries that's built as well here in the U.S. Around the rest of the world, it's going to be in China and India. It's going to be a massive amount of coal. Some as well in Indonesia, Vietnam. Australia is going to struggle because of their fixation on net zero. Same with Germany. But Germany, in fact, has recently made noises. The new coalition government said they're planning to turn their reactors back on. So Western Europe is going to lead the renaissance in the nuclear comeback. I think that's clear.
Well, it seems like, we've, as a country, we've stopped producing and building nuclear plants. It seems to me like the position or policies of the DOE have to change, and the permitting process needs to be more streamlined, and so we can, quickly move forward. And I think the other big concern for a lot of, say, environmentalists is, what are you going to do with the nuclear waste? And I think a plan to deal with that needs to be discussed, which is a more effective way. I don't know. Maybe Elon Musk can ship this stuff up into space and get it out of here. And then we don't have to deal with it and have the exposure here, on Earth. What do you think of that?
Sean, I'm very clear about the waste issue, and the used nuclear fuel is a more accurate way to talk about it. It's not a scientific problem. It's a political problem. And what happened is that under the Nuclear Waste Policy Act of 1982, was it? There was an agreement, and the utilities paid into the Nuclear Waste Fund, and then the federal government never took the waste. So taxpayers, or rather ratepayers that have nuclear utilities, are paying multiple times for this issue. But the problem is, I will say it very clearly. The problem is the Sierra Club, the Natural Resource Defense Council, these radical NGOs that call themselves climate activists who are anti-nuclear. And they have been some of the key opponents of long-term nuclear waste disposal. Now, let me be clear. It's not just them. It's also the state of Nevada, which, when Obama ran for president, he went to Harry Reid and said, "Hey, Harry, I need your support." And Harry said, "Sure, no problem. Just cancel Yucca Mountain." And Obama said, "Okay, sure." And that's one of the first things Obama did when he became president. Mm-hmm. So the waste issue can be resolved if we have the political will. And I think we can get there. Now, the broader question that I think that it goes along with this is, what about the public support for nuclear? And I think, Sean, we've seen a very clear change in public attitudes about nuclear power across the electorate, but particularly among younger people, voters that are the age of my children, who are ranging in their 20s and 30s. They've got a different attitude toward nuclear power because of their concern about climate change. So I think there is a shift, in a very positive one, underway. But as far as the policy goes, we have to solve the waste, we have to solve the capital, the regulation, and the fuel. All of them have to be resolved.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I mean, I think I'm kind of in that mindset too, where it is the most cleanest, efficient fuel power we can generate is from nuclear, and we
smallest footprint, which is key. You need a small footprint,
right?
Lowest resource intensity. That's key. Power density matters. High power density is green.
Let's do it. And then I think there are other good technologies, like hydrogen seems to be a pretty promising new technology. I'd like to see some more there. Yeah, I think there's some there. I think there's something there.
The H stands for hype, Sean. That the hydrogen is. I've written about it a lot. It's a thermodynamic obscenity, as my friend Steve Brick says. It's never going to work at scale. You require too much energy to make a molecule that's very small, hard to tank, hard to use, expensive to use. We've heard the hype about hydrogen for decades. It's still, look at all the projects that are being canceled. I think it's all BS. The whole thing is BS, but
I think there are some interesting new automotives manufacturers come out with some hydrogen engines that seem to be promising. If that's a possibility, I think that'd be great. If small scale, but not mass. Not like providing massive energy, but I think that'd be a good option.
I'd bet on gasoline, diesel fuel, and jet fuel. I would not bet on hydrogen as a transportation fuel.
Well, right. I mean, I think one of the things I'm interested to see is, why do you think the EV market is plummeting in the US, and what factors are preventing the adoption of EV cars across the industry?
Sure. Well, look, it's not just the US where the EV market is hitting a brick wall or running into, hard realities. It's in Europe as well. And there are a number of factors. I think, the tightening economy is a factor, higher interest rates, which makes borrowing for these cars more expensive. But I also think that the entire automotive sector overestimated the amount of consumer pull. Look, I could afford an EV if I wanted to. I have 3 cars in my driveway. The newest one is now 13 years old. I don't want a new car. I don't need a new car. I work at home. But I think that, the people, the way I read the marketplace is, in general, the people who have wanted an EV have already bought one. And further, this goes back to the class issue. What is the profile of an average EV buyer? It's a household income of about $130,000 a year. That's roughly twice the national average. So you don't see working class people buying EVs. You just don't see it.
Yeah.
Bricklayers, carpenters, plumbers, electricians. They don't drive Teslas. Are you kidding me? They drive F-150s. They drive Silverados. They drive Dodge Rams. I've followed this. I've written about it for a long time. The electric vehicle is the next big thing, and it always will be.
Well, I mean, I think the technology on some of those cars are obviously really great. I've seen and sat in and driven a few EVs out there, and they're really nice. I don't disagree. And they get up and go, and they ride real smooth. And, so from a technology perspective and reliability, they seem to be pretty good. Though I think it's the infrastructure for charging is a concern for a lot of people too. They're like, well, I don't know. I mean, what if I get out there and I have to divert my course of my travel to go charge and sit for 45 minutes or so to get, and then it almost is like an inconvenience almost at times. I would think unless you have your own charging and you can go back and forth from your home.
Sure.
But I mean, I like it, but I don't think I'd buy one personally.
Yeah. Well, there you go. I mean, you just talked yourself out of it. And, but I think, there are many issues here around the infrastructure, around range anxiety, around the recycling of the vehicles themselves. What do you do with these vehicles? How do you take them apart?
The lithium ion batteries are a big concern.
That's no simple feat.
No. And I think it's a misnomer that it takes less CO2 emissions to create or, manufacture an EV car versus a, fossil fuel car. And I mean, matter of fact, I think it takes more CO2 emissions out of the earth and within our, the atmosphere to make a EV car than it does to make a fossil fuel car. So
yeah, I don't know about that one. I just think that, what we're seeing already is just this lack of consumer pull. Rivian, as I think I mentioned before, they made 51,000 EVs last year. They lost $4.7 billion. They lost $91,000 for every EV they made, and they didn't make up for it in volume. Ford had the second highest sales of any EV maker in the US after Tesla. And I think they lost something like $52,000 for every EV they made. Tesla itself is not making money on EVs. They're making most of their money on tax credits, or rather the clean air credits that other other car makers are buying from them. So, and in Europe, let's not forget in Europe, where you see Mercedes, Porsche, Audi, Volkswagen, all of them pulling back on their EV plans because the consumers are not buying them in the volume that they anticipated. And then you got the Chinese coming in and saying, hey, we've got a good EV. And why are the Chinese building EVs? Because they can then run their cars on coal instead of imported oil. So it's a complex set of markets, but again, sobriety.
Realism is what that's where you're getting back to, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that's been interesting is to see the pullback from industry on the net zero targets lately. That's been interesting to see. And
the banking alliances. Saying, oh yeah, well, we like making money. Or BP just the other day saying, you know what we're going to do? We're going to drill for oil and gas.
We're going back to what we know, right?
Yeah. And the way Reuters described it as, activist investors are demanding a return on their money. Well, how dare them? Those damn shareholders asking for their return on their investment.
I mean,
And the same happened at Shell. And so there is a shift happening, Sean, and I think this energy realism is taking root. It's not everywhere. You still see the holdouts in Germany, although we've had the change in the new coalition government. Britain, I don't know. I thought that they had some sensibility after being there. I think they just completely lost their minds. The same with the Aussies, same with California and Gavin Newsom. They just don't understand, or the state of New York. I mean, there's some politicians that are so wed to these ideas around energy policy, and they have no apparent concern for the poor and the middle class. And it's something that I can't abide.
Well, I think we all need clean energy, good energy, reliable energy to,
cheap.
Cheap. Well, you mentioned too, over when you were in London, I mean, it was there like the most expensive per kilowatt hour compared to what it is here in the US. It was like ridiculous amount cheaper here than it is there. And I mean, it's got them over a barrel. It's got all the citizens over a barrel. I mean, they can't, live productive, lives because they're kind of slave to the energy costs.
And their industry is shutting down. And, these are high paid jobs and they're shutting them down. And a guy named John Constable, this is a while ago, he said, Europe is going to become a theme park of its own cultural past. It's going to lose its vibrance as economic power because they're shooting themselves in the foot on the energy front. And, and I'll just one quick other point on Britain.
Yeah.
In the last month, there has been an announcement of a massive natural gas deposit onshore in Britain, in near Lincolnshire. 16 trillion cubic feet of gas in place. That's about 5 years worth of. If Britain does nothing else, they could just use that gas and meet all their needs. They won't drill for it and they won't frack. When the news came out, the Labor government came out and said, we're going to make the frack ban permanent. Are you out of your mind? I mean, the results of your bad policy are obvious now. Your energy prices are among the highest in the developed world. You're hurting the poor and the middle class, and yet you maintain this absolutely insane policy because a few activists don't like hydraulic fracturing. And that whole push in the anti-fracking effort in Europe, a lot of it was funded by the Russians. Hello.
Well, I was getting ready to say, isn't this really more like a geopolitical strategy that's really affecting a lot of Europeans where, the big supplier of the energy is Russia for a lot of those countries.
Sure.
And I mean, that is a big challenge. I think a problem that they don't realize they're basically becoming slaves to a dictator, that's going to control their energy supply. I think that's not a good idea.
They walked into the trap and they did it willingly. And you see what happened with Angela Merkel. She decided, we're going to cozy up to the Russians. And I guess I haven't read her autobiography, but apparently it came out and, she kind of just elided over all these issues around the energy front. And now she's being pilloried. And you see in the wake of this now, this reform movement coming to the power in Germany saying, hey, we got to do something different here. And it's not just on energy, of course, it's on immigration. But let me give you one other just quick point here about, election results. And, I'm in Texas. I'm not bragging on Texas. I'm from Oklahoma. I've lived here 40 years, though. So living in Austin now for 40 years. And ever since I moved here, I've heard over and over, Texas is going to turn blue because Hispanics, Latinos are going to vote with the Democratic Party. And yet what happened in November? The Latinos broke for Trump in a big way. He captured 45% of the Latino vote. This was completely unexpected. But the telling results now, and this to me, going back to the immigration issue and also energy, is that along in the Rio Grande Valley, which is southernmost Texas, so Star, Willacy, Hidalgo, and Cameron counties in Texas, those 4 counties are overwhelmingly Latino and Hispanic. Poverty rates in each one of them are 20 to 25% at or more. And they, in 2016, they went for Hillary Clinton over Trump by 60 points, 60 points. In 2024, they broke for Trump by 16 points, a 76-point swing in those 4 counties. In Starr County alone, 76-point swing. It's just incredible. So it goes to the point about pocketbook issues, about inflation, about these issues that ordinary voters care about. Right. And I think that was clearly the case in the Rio Grande Valley.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it starts to affect everyday citizens in their pocketbook, whether that's inflation, the cost of everything that we're
Yeah.
dealing with, they start to have more realization or reality check on, what we need to do,
Yeah.
as with these policies. And I do think if we can do it with a balanced approach, where we're I guess doing it as environmentally friendly as we can, but also, do it in a way that's going to be successful for our reliance of the energy sources, or whether that's, natural gas, whether that's, oil and gas, whether that's, so I mean, solar, whatever. I think that we got to be realistic about it, and know that we got to rely on this, do it smart, but be sustainable in a way we can too. Like, let's try to make good policy decisions as well when it comes to doing this. Do you think there should be more, I guess, support or involvement at a larger scale to help society break away from this problem? Like, should the government be involved with more subsidies, or should
Mm,
companies do more, to help reduce their emissions or whatnot, instead of just individuals trying to recycle? And because we're making it, we're like a sand in the, on the beach, compared to, these companies and the government, who could really make a bigger difference.
sure. Well, I'm leery of too much steering by government entities. Let me just be clear about that. Now, that said, if I'm going to say, well, what are my preferences? The government is going to have to be involved in nuclear energy. Just there's no doubt about it, because you
Right.
can't just say, oh, here, Exxon, you handle all the nuclear waste. We trust you, right? You're going to have strong government involvement in nuclear energy throughout the value chain, and that's
Yeah.
just simply a reality. But I think that I see for all the every there's this common theme, or people think, oh, well, we don't have an energy policy in the U.S. Well, okay, but isn't it incredible how we've stumbled along with no energy policy, and yet we've come across this shale revolution, and it all happened because private enterprise and incredible technologies were developed by entrepreneurs to extract more oil and gas out of rock that was previously thought it couldn't be tapped.
Yeah. Right. Right.
So what we have seen by just stumbling forward in a I'm not going to say it's a perfect free market. There's no such thing as a perfect free market, but entrepreneurial capitalism and private ownership of mineral rights and dynamic capital markets and liquid capital markets in the United States have resulted in a situation where we are in the most powerful position with regard to energy of any country in the world, and that includes the Saudis. I've been to Saudi Arabia. I'm no fan. What the reality is, though, is that we have cheap, abundant, reliable natural gas. They don't, and we're sending natural gas to Saudi Arabia. I'll repeat: the U.S. is going to be exporting natural gas to the Saudis. And why do they want our natural gas? Because they're burning their oil to produce electricity, and they don't want to do that. So the U.S. is a natural gas superpower. We produce more natural gas than Canada, Iran, Qatar, and Indonesia combined. I think I've got those numbers right. It's incredible what is happening in the United States because of this entrepreneurial bent in the oil and gas industry and how it has benefited American consumers.
Yeah, I think more thoughtful pipeline engineering and design to get this natural gas out to the utilities, that would be good. I think that'd help a lot, decrease some of the stress and inflation that's going on in this world. And wow, what do you think everyone needs to know or should know about why energy growth is so important for our future?
Well, energy is the economy. Oil is the economy. Electricity is the economy. I'm going to publish an article in the next few days on what's happening in China, and you can look at electricity use and GDP growth in China, and it goes hand in hand. Electricity doesn't cure poverty, but if without electricity, you cannot cure poverty, right? It's impossible. Energy is what allows us to become more human. And I don't want to get too philosophical here, but we are godlike in our ability to create, but we can't do that. We can't create. We can't fulfill our God-given talents if we don't have energy. And I saw that with Rahena Jamadar and Majlish Bukur, and it had this massive effect on me because I realized, oh my God, I didn't understand why energy poverty is such a killer. It's not just that it kills people; it kills their ability to fulfill
their destiny,
their destiny or their potential.
Right.
And so expensive energy, I'll put it even more simply, is expensive energy is the enemy of the poor. And I will die on that hill all day long, all night long, the rest of my life. And expensive energy is the enemy of the poor. And it came very clearly to me a few years ago. I was in Austin and I ran into this acquaintance of mine, and he said, "Oh, energy's too cheap." And I thought, man, you just really don't understand what the hell you're talking about. And we haven't chatted much since then, but it was just one of these moments where I thought, and he was a child of privilege and had has a nice house, and he's going to, vacationing all over the world. He doesn't care about his energy bill. He doesn't even hardly look at it, I'm certain.
Yeah.
But this idea is energy's too cheap. It was offensive to me. It's still offensive to me.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, energy, the cheapest we can get it, the better, right? I mean, that's what I say. Well, Robert, I really appreciate you coming on to the show. It's a great conversation. I think we could probably continue this type of dialogue for, another hour or so, but, maybe down the road, we'll have you back on if it's okay with you. And we can talk about, what you're up to, what you're seeing in the industry. It's always good to have someone that's really got a pulse on what's happening in this space to come on and educate some of the listeners on the podcast. And I really appreciate your thoughts, your insights. And we look forward to listening to you. I will get your contact information out to, we call it the ET Nation here. And
sure.
We'll get you all the information out there for them.
RobertBryce.substack.com.
There you go. Get that Substack. Robert Bryce, man. I love that. Substack.
Yeah.
It's good stuff.
All right, Sean. Well, it's my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Thanks a lot, Robert. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening and watching the show. If you enjoyed the show, then please share it with your friends and coworkers on social media and tell somebody in person. Thanks for being with us, ET Nation.